used to teach, you told me once.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that students came to you wanting to know? I mean, it was sort of Bluegrass 101 sort of thing.
Yeah, Bluegrass 101. And I used to teach kind of all different levels. I would teach at music camps where you're teaching a whole group. And usually the camp would just assign me a level. So when I would agree to teach there, then they would say, okay, you're teaching advanced guitar, or you're teaching beginner guitar, or you're teaching, sometimes I would have special like topics that I would teach about. I would do like bluegrass improvising, or like playing fast, or teaching a bunch of fiddle tunes on the guitar, or I would often do like a cross picking class or a clawhammer guitar class. So it really was a big range, and I think because my dad is a music teacher, he gave me lots of tips for how to teach different levels, and you always have to kind of get there and then feel it out. Even sometimes when it'll say advanced guitar, you get there and you're like, oh, this isn't the level I thought it would be. Maybe they're way more advanced, or maybe there's one like random like 14-year-old kid who's like insanely good, and then there's like other people who have just started and they're beginners who are in the advanced class. So you never really know what you're walking into in a situation like that. And even with private like one-on-one lessons, you kind of have to figure out, I feel like such a big part of it is just meeting the student where they're at. So I feel like I got okay at teaching pretty much any different level on guitar. Even like the most basic stuff can be really fun to teach, like a basic strumming pattern, or like teaching someone how to do like some basic pick direction exercises that can be really eye-opening for people.
What sort of thing would you show them then? I mean, at that level, the sort of basic entry level.
I feel like one thing that I could kind of teach to any level was just really breaking down like a bluegrass rhythmic strum. So like just pick, strum, pick, strum. There's so much kind of nuance, because you'll see people who are going, and they don't really know like the basic strumming pattern, and that can be even harder than these really complicated ones I would see students doing. Like people would come in and be putting so many strums into their rhythm playing, like, and that can just create so much like chaos almost. And when you get into a band situation playing with other instruments, so breaking it down to where I'm like, okay, you want like the bass notes sort of even with the strum. You don't want the bass notes to be way louder or the strum to be way louder so you don't hear the bass notes. So I would go like pick, strum, and then I'd also try to get people to just strum like basically the top 3 strings and make it like a really quick kind of flick of the wrist, rather than like you hear some of that where it's just not super punchy, but in bluegrass you want it to sound like. So no matter what tempo you're playing at, your strum is like very quick. And a lot of times that was really hard for people, even like in the more advanced levels, to just kind of simplify and get like the nuances of a bluegrass rhythm. And then for like lead playing, I would have beginners especially like tap your feet and your pick. You want to move your pick along with the direction your foot's tapping in. So if the song is like when my foot's tapping down on the downbeat, my pick is moving down, and then when the foot comes up on the offbeat, your pick direction goes up. And that's kind of a flat picking thing where you're playing at these high speeds, so you want to have like a really fluid kind of pick direction. Most flat pickers you see are kind of picking along with the rhythm of the song. So you notice my pick direction is going right along with the beats, I guess. Yeah. Down, up, down, up. So that would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on the off beats my pick is going up.
Right. Do you have a recommendation for plectrum sort of thickness or anything like that?
I use these ones that like, this is kind of an uncommon one to use, but I have like a Dunlop, this like jazz tone 208. It's really thick, and so a lot of people don't like them, but that's just kind of what I've been using since I was like 10 years old, so I got used to it, and then I never ended up switching. A lot of people who play flat pick guitar love the blue chips, and those are a little more expensive, and they make all different shapes and sizes. I think they're handmade, so you get really nice like bevel on the pick. It's very sort of more like a handcrafted type of pick. These are more just like mass produced, I guess. But yeah, I don't have a specific recommendation. I think if your pick is too thin, it's going to sound really floppy, and you really need to be able to get a lot of volume. So that's why I use the thicker pick that's not going to like bend when I'm hitting the strings really hard.
And when you start showing people the sort of basic lead pattern or the accompaniment patterns, because sometimes that's single notes as well, isn't it?
Totally.
What sort of thing do you take them? Where's the gateway into
Right. Yeah, I usually show people just a really simple tune. Like if I'm teaching people who want to play at a bluegrass jam session, I might teach them a common tune that a lot of people know. So like I remember the first thing I ever learned on the guitar was a tune called Cripple Creek, and it goes like this. So it's very simple melody. I might teach a total beginner that, and then some basic chords, and yeah, you can get into playing like leads, or not leads, but single notes when you're switching chords. So I would maybe show people a bass run like this. Those are the first kind of bass runs I learned to connect one chord to another, just in G to C, and then G to D, and C back to G. Yeah.
What about the more advanced?
The more advanced, so I feel like you just are kind of coming up with variations of like basically the same stuff. So instead of going, I might go, so adding in extra notes and making it a little bit syncopated sounding, or but you're basically just finding ways to lead either like up to the chord or down to the chord. And sometimes I would even like print out a whole sheet of different ones and have people practice a song and try to play a different one each time that they switch chords, because there's like endless variations even if you're playing the same notes to kind of mess with the rhythm, or play them in a different order, or like hang on one note longer before you get to the chord.
What about actual picking itself? Because you must get a lot of inquiries about how did you develop your right hand and all the rest of it. So what sort of advice do you give people on that?
For me, like the biggest thing was just kind of making sure my hand isn't tensing up when I play. So like I try to keep my hand really loose and relaxed, and that helps me play fast, and it helps just kind of with accuracy. And if you're tensing up anywhere, like the playing is just going to sound stiffer, and you're going to make more mistakes. But for me, my right hand, I've kind of never like tried to change it drastically since I started playing and like learning kind of the fundamentals. I just got into the habit of playing like this, where when I play lead, like my fingers are usually sort of loosely tucked in, and then my wrist is basically resting on the bridge, sometimes like on the bridge pins, or even like the low strings if I'm playing up high. A lot of people like to gently like rest their ring finger and pinky on the guitar when they're playing leads, just to kind of anchor your hand. But for me, my wrist is sort of what's like making contact with the guitar. And then when I play rhythm, the wrist comes up and my hand's just floating. So if I'm playing like strumming, and I'll switch to lead, my hand goes down on the guitar.
Right. And have you devised sort of exercises for people, or recommendations for things they can practice to increase their speed and also fluency, of course?
Yeah. I think there's like all these pick exercises, and I would have to like give credit to my dad because he kind of developed all these exercises that he showed to me, and I remember practicing them as a kid, and then later on just having it as a resource to help other people that I was teaching guitar to. So like when you're playing with a pick, like there's only a few kind of movements that you're gonna have to get used to. So you're either staying on the same string, which would be, or you're switching strings up a string, which would be like down on the third string and then up on the second string is what I'm doing. So I would have people practice that, like that. Or you're switching down a string, which would, like, let's say you start on the second string and you go down to the third string. Oops. That's often what's hardest for people is switching between the two strings in between the strings. And you see even like when I started doing it, I like hit the wrong string. So usually I'll have students like play as fast as they can on one string. That's kind of the easiest one. And then you switch up a string. And that one sometimes is a little trickier for people. And then usually the hardest one to do is the switching in between the two strings. So... And sometimes if people are having a hard time playing fast, or they have, like, they're playing a song and there's a certain part that they always slow down at or make a mistake, usually it's one of those pick movements that's kind of tripping them up. So, and usually it's kind of that one of playing in between the two strings, because that is the most difficult for most people. So I would have students try to get all three of those moves like up to the same tempo, to where one of those isn't kind of the weak link in your playing. And then from there you just kind of, if you want even more pick exercises, maybe you practice different rhythms. So instead of just down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, 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 up. Kind of like an anticipated rhythm that you might play in a certain passage of a song, or even switching between three strings, which is where you get into cross picking. So that you have all of those. You have like the outside pick movement and then the inside one. So you go down, up, down. So you're starting with the outside, the two strings, down, up, and then you add another down. So once you get those two pick motions pretty solid, then you can start to do the cross picking. And then, you can kind of apply those to songs. Like...
Yeah, I was going to say when you bring the left hand in, then for playing single notes, I mean, do you have any recommendation for people to sort of get that rather than just play scales? Right.
Yeah. So scales, I feel like, is a good place to start, but sometimes you learn a bunch of scales and then you're like, well, I know all these scales, but they don't sound quite right when I try to play them in a song. So what I like to do is kind of simplify the scale, either play a pentatonic scale, or what I like even better is just kind of play a scale that still emphasizes the notes of the chord. So instead of going all of a sudden when you get to that B note over the C chord, so I'm playing a C scale starting from the low C note here. I get to the B note and suddenly the seventh of the chord is on the downbeat if I'm going. And then you have a D note that lands on the downbeat, and that just doesn't sound super musical over a C chord when you're just starting out. There's definitely ways to incorporate those notes, but sometimes I just have people leave out the seventh, and then it sounds like this. And suddenly that sounds like you're playing over a C chord instead of just playing a random scale. So you could take that kind of like 6-note scale, I guess, just leaving out the sevens, leaving out the B notes over a C chord. And that kind of sounds like you're improvising, and then just finding little ways to work those runs into a song. That's a fun way to start improvising over stuff. So if you are switching from like a G chord to a C chord, starting on a G scale or a G kind of like arpeggiated thing. So there I'm leaving out the F sharp. And you can kind of tell what chords I'm playing over because I'm emphasizing those chord tones. In G, that would be a G note, a B note, and a D note, and in C, that's a C, an E, and a G. And you kind of want those to land on the downbeats, or you want to like hang out on those notes extra to make it sound like you know what chord you're playing over, I guess. How I started improvising was I learned a bunch of fiddle tunes, and I just found little tiny ways to vary them. So if I remember one of the first tunes that I learned to play was called Salt Creek. It goes like this. And then adding in little things like sliding up to the first note. And then maybe add in like a pull-off. Stuff like that can make the song sound a lot more kind of exciting, and you're still basically playing the melody, but you're just adding in a little tiny variation here and there.
Excellent.